This is our presentation on discourse communities, how different groups communicate and why it matters. This presentation is by Magdalyn Kelley, and Anna Kohnke. All right, so first you want to go over what is a discourse community. Swales defines a discourse community in Melzer's Writing Spaces, Readings on Writing in Chapter 7. He lays out 6 different characteristics of a discourse community, starting with a broadly agreed upon set of common public goals, mechanisms of intercommunication among members, use of these communication mechanisms to provide information and feedback, one or more genres that help further the goals of the discourse community, a specific lexis or specialized language, and finally, a threshold level of expert members. In this presentation, we'll be discussing 3 different discourse communities.
My name is Casey. For my discourse community, I interviewed a high school AP teacher who also teaches at a local community college. Her name was Cheryl Lebman Brown. She taught over at Columbus High School. I will show that this high school English teacher does count as a discourse community. So, first of all, is the methods that they use for communication. They use email, email amongst each other, email to their superiors, email to parents of students. They will text, although not as much as they used to, since students are no longer allowed to have phones inside of the school. Remind is a technology that teachers can use to communicate directly with parents mainly. Canvas is just like we use here at Texas Tech. A teacher can reach out to their students to give them assignments, instructions, grades, and feedback. Skyward is a grading technology that teachers use to record grades. And lastly is the phone. Usually, for the most part, she said that the phone was not used except for speaking to parents. She did emphasize that they do everything digitally. So, any grading, any communication, for the most part, is going to be digital, except with each other. She said that, and this surprised me, that they try not to leave a paper trail when possible. They want to communicate, but they also don't want something that they say or might be used against them if a parent has an issue. And I felt that was kind of sad that they couldn't have that communication. She did mention as well that she wished that more parents would come and talk in person and so forth, instead of just sending emails, because she felt that people could understand each other a lot better face to face than through an email or a text. And then lastly, they absolutely do have a jargon or lexicon that is specific to teaching. So some of those are going to be an ARD. An ARD is a committee of experts that meet with the teachers, the parents, and they will work together for a student who is in the special education program to come up with what is called an IEP. An IEP is a individualized educational plan, and it is a guideline that the teachers in the school have to follow by law to meet certain students in the special education program to meet their needs. They also have a 504. A 504 is going to be for students who have a disability but are not in a special education program. It's very similar to an IEP, except that it is not quite as extensive, and it has a little bit more flexibility in this. They also have what is called an accommodation modification. That is basically when you have a student who has a 504 or an IEP and you must make accommodations for them. That could be many things. It could be giving them extra time on a test. It could be allowing them to have a break when they need it. For instance, my daughter, she has an IEP. She's allowed to go on walks when she needs it, or my son, he is allowed to draw if he gets bored. They also have a CBA, which is a campus-based assessment. So that is going to be benchmark testing that they do throughout the year. And that's just to see where the kids are. And it's mainly to prepare them for things like the STAR test, which you could add STAR on there, as the STAR testing is also a lexicon jargon of the teaching community. I really enjoyed my interview with Miss Liebman, and I definitely learned a lot. And I look forward to taking some of that information that I learned into my career when I begin teaching. Thank you.
Okay, so I also want to be a high school English teacher. Um, like Casey said, this is a discourse community because there are, and I'll explain who I interviewed, what she said, why this is a discourse community. I interviewed Miss Kim Villegas. She was my old high school teacher when I was a sophomore and senior in high school. She teaches on level and AP classes. So the first one I wanted to talk about was the common set of goals. It looks similar, or it looks simple because it just says students know how to communicate and read effectively. But that is the goal. Because when I was talking to her, we discussed how the public education system has really not has been having a hard time, especially in reading, writing, communicating. So their goal is pretty simple. It's to create effective communicators and readers. And not only did she say that she saw it, but as a Kumon teacher, I see it as well. The next one is mechanisms of communication. So communication is very important when it comes to teaching. It sets the tone moving forward regarding how the teacher-student relationship will be, how the teacher-parent relationship is going to be. They all intertwine. So tone is really, really important here. Um, in regards to parents, usually it'll be communicating through email. She said she doesn't do it a lot, but when she does, she makes sure that the tone is professional, it's focused, and written in a way where there's no way to place blame on any student, parent, or teacher. That way, it just makes the communication and understanding a little bit better, so there's no problems. And then communication with other teachers, that usually happens over text or in person. This one can be a little communicating with each other can be a little less professional, a less straightforward, just because they're in person. You know, it's easier to communicate when you're in person. And then the next one for feedback, what she does, this can be free form to any teaching community, but what she does with her colleagues, she does it while she creates and shares lessons plans. So she says that she usually sits down and gets feedback when they sit down, compare calendars. So again, they'll be doing this in person. So they'll be all on the same page about curriculum, lesson plans, and they can modify it how they'd like. Um, Again, this is up to the community of teachers how they like to do it. This is just how she likes to do it. And then with the Lexington jargon, there is a lot to pick up on, she said. It can be difficult to learn. When she was learning it, it was just on the go process. So it's really vital in teaching. Not only is the teaching space always evolving with technology, but there are other factors such as legal matters, like what Casey said in her previous slide, the IEPs, 504s. Again, can also be state, like she said, the STAR. It can be district. It's just very specific, and it is a learning process. And then for genres, rubrics are pretty huge, especially when it comes to English. So I would say this is the most commonly used genre. Um, it is the main way of communicating strengths and weaknesses of the students to students, parents, and teachers. It helps people understand what they need to work on and what they're already good at. Another genre she told me that she likes to use Google Notes whenever she's doing a lesson. Like, so if she's doing a lesson in class, she'll have her computer out with Google Notes. If she gets feedback from the students, she'll write it down as a note, or she just wants to remind herself of something for the next lesson, she'll just quickly jot it down on Google Notes as well. And so for the last one, for threshold level of members, I would say that it's pretty, I guess, easygoing in the sense that no one has authority over the other. So, for example, I was told by Miss Villegas that if she needed help from a colleague, another teacher, and there was an option between a teacher that was very new, it's her first year teaching, but she looked like she had it all together, versus an old veteran teacher who doesn't really have it together, she would go to that new teacher. So it really is, it just depends on preferability and, comfortability as well. So I really enjoyed interviewing my old teacher. I learned a lot, and a lot of this information did surprise me.
All right. My discourse community is librarians and other library staff. This is a discourse community because it has all the 6 characteristics, common goals, Lexis jargon, etc. I interviewed a member of library staff at my local library. Her name is Jamie Groth. And I really enjoyed interviewing her, and I learned definitely lots of things that I did not know previously about what it's like to work in a library. In terms of library staff, there are actually 2 different levels of staff generally at libraries. You have professional librarians who usually have their master's or even their PhD in library science, and then anyone who is below that level of education is just considered library staff, and their title isn't librarian. So the woman I interviewed has actually gotten her master's already, but she's not on staff as a librarian quite yet because there's not an opening. But regardless, staff communication between library staff is often in person. The library is a public building. They have to be in the public space a lot, shelving books, etc. So often they have to communicate in person. However, because they're in a public space and not in a closed office, any communication that happens in person they have to keep in mind that there may be patrons who may overhear. The librarian that I interviewed described her reference desk that she worked at as like a fishbowl, and that is very visible, very easy to overhear because libraries are generally very quiet, and just they have to keep that in mind when they communicate in person. They have to maintain a certain level of professionalism. There really is no space for any gossip or talking behind other coworkers' backs or even talking about patrons, because again, it's very easy to be overheard. Because of that, however, they do some communication on Microsoft Teams, which would be a way that they could communicate that could be a little more casual, a little less professional, simply because it's not at risk of being overheard. Um, in terms of communicating with patrons, they also will sometimes communicate or will often communicate in person because the woman that I interviewed works at a reference desk. People are often approaching the reference desk. They have all manner of requests and questions, and they're anytime a librarian's at the reference desk or in the public space, they are available to be approached by patrons. A lot of communication is over the phone. The library staff member that I interviewed was one of the people who's responsible for answering the phones. And again, that's a public number. Anyone could call it at any time, or well, during business hours, and could ask anything or just even call to talk. Again, because of this, the goal of library staff is to balance friendliness and professionalism. Again, they want to be friendly public faces, public servants, friendly face at the reference desk, but they also have to be professional. That being said, their tone must stay that way regardless of the behavior of the patron. Some patrons are very patient, very friendly, very understanding, and some are not. And it's the job of the library staff to remain consistent with how they treat every patron. They have to treat them all with the same level of respect, professionalism, and friendliness. Ultimately, librarians are public servants. They are part of, and they're employed by the city. For me, that's the city of Waco. They're employed by the city of Waco. They represent the city, and they have to maintain a certain level of professionalism because of that. They represent the city. Other forms of communication include email. Like I said, my staff person who I interviewed is responsible for not only the phones, but also the library's inbox. And so when they're emailing patrons back who have emailed the library's inbox, they are emailing on behalf of the library and all the library staff. Another form of communication is the library's social media, and that can be less professional. Mainly, the role of the social media is to be very fun and engaging and make it so that patrons who see the social media are feel invited in to participate in various programs or use various resources the library has. Similarly, graphics and posters, same thing. They are to be very fun, engaging, to invite people to participate in various programs and events. Um, Finally, in terms of jargon and lexis, there are some terms that kind of cross over between library and academia, but in terms of jargon and lexis that is specific to libraries, we have the phrase call number, which is a 9-digit number that every single item in the library has one that is unique to that item, and that just makes it so that librarian staff and patrons can look up a very specific item. Uh, Interlibrary loan, or ILL. The libraries in the city of Waco have the ability to borrow items from other libraries within the state of Texas, and so that would be an interlibrary loan. And then finally, OPAC, or OPAC, which stands for Online Public Access Catalog, and that is simply the catalog of every single resource, whether print or digital, that the City of Waco Library has access to. And again, that's a public access catalog, so anyone can access it, and that is for the public to know, citizens of Waco to know what all their library has, so they know what all they have access to. I really enjoyed interviewing this librarian. She spoke a lot about what it means to work in public information, how important it is to have information available to the public, and what her role is in that. So I learned a lot.
So next we want to discuss the similarities and differences between these two discourse communities. It is interesting because two of us have the same discourse community. You're not going to see as many differences. Also, both of these communities are related in that they both do deal with kind of an educational aspect. You have English teachers, you have a librarian. Obviously, they go together. So, beginning to discuss these similarities and differences, we'll talk about the modes of communication. Both myself and Anna's high school English teacher community uses email, as does Magdalyn's librarian community. We both do in person. The difference there being in person, a teacher is going to be speaking to the students and their coworkers in person. They're not going to have to deal as much with the general public. Whereas Magdalyn's librarian discourse community, they don't know exactly who they're going to be interacting with that day. They are not going to have a prior relationship. They're not going to know each other. And I think that's why it's so important in her community to constantly have to be extremely professional. Whereas if you're a teacher and you can joke around with your kids a little bit more, you know them, you know what to expect. Next is going to be for teachers. They do use text. I will say though that my interviewee, she said they didn't use it as much anymore as they did in the past. So both the teachers and the librarians do use phone. Again, though, in a different way. When the librarian receives a phone call, it's going to be from almost like a customer. A library patron is going to call them. They're going to have questions. They're going to need information. Whereas if a teacher is getting a phone call, it's probably going to be a parent wondering about something that's going on with their child. That also brings me to going back to the email. Email is also quite common for teachers when speaking to the parents. And again, they're not going to have a question as much as they're going to most likely have a concern that they want to speak about. Teachers have special technology like remind and talking points that the librarian does not have, but a librarian will have social media. Teachers are not going to have social media. And in fact, the teacher that I interviewed said that they try to stay as far away from social media as possible, mostly for legal reasons. Then teachers are going to have Skyward, which is technology that allows them to write down grades and keep records of things. A librarian is going to have technology like Microsoft Teams to talk amongst each other. I did not have the teacher that I spoke to, she didn't mention any kind of Microsoft Teams or Zoom or any of that. Now, she did say, though, that when she taught at the community college, that they did have that, but my focus was mostly on her as a high school teacher. Lastly, the high school teacher is going to have Canvas, exactly the same way that we use Canvas at Texas Tech. A librarian is going to have more posters and graphics as a way to communicate with the patrons, almost like as an advertisement of maybe things going on or things that they should know about. Then next we have the category of the audience. Both the English teacher community and the librarian community are going to have coworkers. In this case, most coworkers are equals, people that you're going to work alongside of. I will say, though, that for a teacher, you're not probably interacting as much with your coworkers as a librarian would, as a teacher is going to be mostly independently teaching their students. You have parents as an audience, whereas a librarian does not have to deal with the parents of their patrons. So a teacher has to be very careful about everything they say and do, as they do not want anything negative to ever be getting back to a parent, just like my teacher spoke about not wanting to leave paper trails. Then you have your students as well. The students are people that in a way, you of course have to treat them with respect, but they also have to treat you back with respect. So there is a bit of an authoritative component to being a teacher in that relationship with their students. Whereas with a librarian, you're going to have your patrons, they're your general public. They don't have to treat you in any particular way, other than obviously in a legal way. They couldn't come in and make a huge scene and so forth, but they don't necessarily have to show the respect that a student has to show to a teacher. So I think that's a difference there. The audience that we're catering to, one has something that they want to prove to us. The students want to do well for their teachers so that they in turn do well. A person going into a library is probably just going to have basic questions that they need answered, but they're not necessarily trying to go in to impress or get something from the librarian. Now, of course, they will probably respect them because they have the knowledge that they need to get the questions that they have answered. Last, we have our jargon and lexicon. So again, with me and Anna having the same discourse community as teachers, our jargon lexicon is going to be the same. So we have our ART, our 504, our IEP, our CBA, and our accommodation modification. Again, those are terms that if you are not a teacher or don't have a student, a parent, if you're not a parent with a student, you probably would not know. With a librarian, you're going to have your call number, your interlibrary loan, your OPAC, online public access catalog. Those are things that I, as someone who's not a librarian, I would never know what those were. And if Magdalyn hadn't explained them to me, I still wouldn't know without asking her. So it's definitely a very specific and specialized jargon and lexicon for each of these communities. I think that all in all, I was not shocked that we didn't have as much difference than that I would expect. We had a lot of similarities. And again, going back to what I said earlier, I think that has to do with the fact that these two careers and these two discourse communities are very interrelated. And so it is easy to understand them and see why they do have so many similarities.
Okay, so as we come to a close, I think it's important to realize that discourse communities between teachers, librarians, they are very similar, like Casey said, but it's also important to note that there are differences and that these differences make each job unique and special. And learning about these differences in communication and how they work within the different careers is vital to know not only know, but to apply and adapt to. It's how we grow as people and groups and how we can communicate with each other in the career and outside of our careers. So as we saw today, each characteristic prepares and guides us so that we don't fail as working citizens. So I also just had some key takeaways at the bottom here. I think these were our main, I wouldn't say differences, but where we differed a little bit is the in-person versus digital communication and our jargon for sure. So those were our key takeaways. And I think it's also important to note that all three of us from this presentation and from our interviews and this experience, we've learned a lot about our different discourse communities, and we're all excited to apply them and adapt to them when we get into those careers.